Hello. Hello, dear class. This is, you know whose goofy mug this is. This is your professor videoing his way in to your life to suggest a few ways that I hope might be helpful in your reading of Shakespeare's Macbeth, or the Scottish play, as it's known, because to mention its name is to invoke a long theatrical tradition of disasters that have attended productions in the theatre. But I don't think we can do any harm by saying the word outside of the theatre, and since we're not actually planning a production. So in Macbeth, you have not one but two potentially tragic figures, let's not call them heroes, as you do in the Antigone, in fact. And in this case, they're husband and wife. They clearly commit the sin or the crime of hubris. That's to say, they are arrogant in their desire for success and fame and power, unlike Othello, who, as by comparison, is not. He may be a little arrogant. His belief in his own judgment is no less than you would think it might be in a highly successful man, a highly successful warrior, but he doesn't aspire to a crown. Consider for a moment in these Shakespearean plays the absence of the gods and how this affects the nature of the tragedy, because these are what are usually referred to as tragedies, Shakespearean tragedies, as opposed to Greek tragedies. Without the gods, our heroes, our central figures, are not battling against... Oh, he's touching his face. Sorry. They're not battling against supernatural warnings, which are a clear factor. And Agamemnon, in the play that bears his name, has dangerous, problematic warnings from the gods, explanations from the gods as to how he is going to achieve this expedition to prize his sister-in-law back from the Trojans. And unless he sacrifices his daughter, the whole expedition and the whole Greek world falls apart. So that helps us to understand Agamemnon and not see him as a villain, which indeed he isn't, unless you will not forgive him, which is understandable, for killing his daughter, but he's not doing so for malicious ends. In Macbeth, we have the most unusual situation of the witches, who are supernatural, who do know, in much the same way that the Oracle at Delphi knows correctly, truthfully, what's going to happen, and alerts one of our tragic figures, Macbeth, actually, and his friend Banquo, to what's going to happen. And so Macbeth goes along with it, which I'm not sure if he has to, but once he's gone along with it, he could then he could decide not to go along with it if it involves murdering the old King Duncan. He doesn't have to do that, although he has the witch's prophecy to encourage him. And consider by comparison Oedipus, who has a prophecy of actually nothing but harm coming to him, although that's not what Apollo says. He just says you'll kill your father. He doesn't say you'll come to harm, but then to marry by mistake your mother is probably a punishment that he could have seen as such, whereas the witches don't say to Macbeth, you will acquire the kingship. They don't say how he'll acquire it, but how he will acquire it, but they don't say, and you'll be punished for it, unless their idea is that he would eventually become king. Perhaps old Duncan would have died. He would have been the next king. He wouldn't have killed anyone to get it. The witches do not say that he will kill to get it. And of course, they also say that his descendants, Macbeth's, will not be kings of Scotland, whereas those of his friend Banquo, who will not achieve great glories in his lifetime, nonetheless will have the glory or the satisfaction and the pleasure of knowing that his descendants will be kings of Scotland. So So I've now lost my place, which is something that I'm afraid will become a commonplace of your struggles to understand my meaningful or otherwise messages to you. Here I am again on your screen, except that somebody's in the middle of phoning me. There's a lot happening in these fancy technological exercises in what's called remote learning. So, yes, are both Macbeth and Lady Macbeth villains? Well, she certainly encourages the crime. Do we identify with them in any sense, as we might be said to identify even identify with the victims of fate in Greek tragedy, including Oedipus and Agamemnon and even Creon? You could empathize with in certain respects. Do we empathize with Macbeth and his wife? Hardly. All we have is their determination to achieve the crown, the throne, at all costs, including murder. So there's a crucial difference there between Greek tragedy and Shakespearean tragedy. In Othello, I think you can identify with Othello. He's a victim and responsible for perhaps his own foolishness in overlooking Iago. That's a very important aspect of the play, not always concentrated on by readers, but I would like you to concentrate on it. And a further thing is that Macbeth is a highly political play, not so much because of the action within the play, which of course is political, but in its choice, in Shakespeare's choice of this story to tell is entirely political, because not only were witches a subject of great interest to the new king of England, who comes down from Scotland to take the share with Scotland, the English throne, but also he himself is a descendant of Macbeth's friend Banquo, of whom the witches say that his descendants will be kings of Scotland, as indeed occurs. So he's painting a family portrait for the king, and in doing so, Shakespeare, is choosing a subject not because he necessarily thinks it's a wonderful subject he wants to write about, but because he knows he needs to appeal. He needs the approval of the new king in order for his company of actors to be funded by the crown and to continue. Left to himself, I guess Shakespeare would have written plays like Hamlet, which he chooses, I think, because he's fascinated by the idea of the king, the prince who feigns madness while he does his detective work on the crime of who killed his father. I think Shakespeare loved that idea. Maybe that isn't what he loved about it, but he was certainly free to love it without regard to what would politically, in the period in which he was writing, in 1600, what would politically be useful for him. So much I don't want to go on at great length, also because in order to upload one of my videos, if it's 33 minutes long, as one of my videos for my other class on Irish literature was, it will take all night to upload. But still, there it is, working away all night while I'm sleeping the sleep of innocence, which is the next thing I want to say to you. I've asked you to find some beautiful lines from Macbeth, because it is among the most beautifully written, perhaps in some ways the most beautifully written, along with Hamlet, I'm touching my skin, but I'm touching my hair. Is that the same thing? I'm going to touch it now with my sleeve, and in doing so, having talked about innocent sleep, I am ready to give you the first quote that I want to give you as an example of beautiful writing in Macbeth. Innocent sleep, says Macbeth, enviously now that he's a criminal, he can't sleep properly. Innocent sleep, sleep that knits up the ravelled sleeve of care. A beautiful way of putting it. Ravelled meaning unravelled. At night, the cares that beset you, the woes of the day, are ravelled up and knitted up. A lovely idea of sleep there, carefully knitting back. This isn't one of my unravelled sleeves, but I have many that are seriously unravelled and can do with the knitting care of sleep. Then I want to refer you to an extraordinary line where Shakespeare Macbeth speaks of the multitudinous seas incarnadine. Incarnadine meaning to make red. In fact, the next line is, and make the green one red. Or, and make the green one red. Actors are always having to decide, is it incarnadine to render red the multitudinous seas and make the green one red, or make the green, the Egyptians used to call the Mediterranean the Great Green, and make the green one red. Anyway, it's the only four-word line of blank verse that I can think of, and it has two very little words in it, the and seas. The multitudinous seas incarnadine. It's got an extra syllable. It's got an 11th syllable, as do many, many lines in Macbeth, that notably irregular, which is great. I love when Lady Macbeth says, "Naught's had, all's spent." Fantastically terse. Naught's had, all's spent. In this play, he's particularly bold about pithy statements which sound 300 years ahead of their time. And the great lines that Macbeth says when he utters his first two extraordinary words, light thickens, and the crow makes wing to the rooky wood. Rooks are another term for crows, the rooky wood. Rooky is not a normal adjective. Light thickens, and the crow makes wing to the rooky wood. Good things of day begin to droop and drowse. An extraordinary line, good things of day. It's shocking in its simplicity in terms of how you wrote in 1600. And then, of course, the most famous speech that he wrote, next to Be or Not to Be, and I'm going to utter this, hopefully, unless I dry, as actors say, forget the lines. He dried. I dried. I'm going to speak it without reference to the text, though you couldn't know I could be cheating. When Macbeth says, most famously, tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creep in this petty pace from day to the last syllable of recorded time. And all our yesterdays have lit the way. No, it isn't. And all our yesterdays, if I'm not having to do this to you and demonstrate that I know it, I remember this speech pretty well and have been remembering it this way for nearly 60 years, more than 60 years, in fact. And more, thank you, memory, thank you, and more, and all our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to study death. Out, brief candle, life's but a shadow. A poor player who struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. So in that extraordinary speech, he writes a lot of, strangely enough, regular lines. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. An 11th syllable there, but that's known as the feminine line with an 11th syllable. Creeps in this petty pace from day to day. That's a perfect line of blank verse. And all our yesterdays have lighted fools, another one. The way to dusty death, out, brief candle. The 11th syllable. Out, have lighted fools the way to dusty death, out, brief candle. Life's but a shadow. Life's but a shadow. It's impossible to think of it iambically. Just the sense drives you. Life's but a shadow. And now I've tried. I've tried. I tried again. Life's but a shadow, a poor player. Life's but a shadow, a poor player who struts and frets. Well, there's 12 syllables there. That's a totally irregular line which occurs in this speech and occurs in To Be or Not to Be, around lines that don't look like regular blank verse, but they're 10 syllables. So life's but a shadow, a poor player who struts and frets, his hour upon the stage and then is heard no more. Regular blank verse. It is a tale told by an idiot. 10. Full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. So you've got a line that's totally not iambic verse, nor should it be. He's talking about the meaninglessness of life. He's not going to say so in regular verse. So many extraordinary things in that speech. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow, extraordinary in itself. Nobody in 1600 is writing lines of verse like that. Creeps in this petty pace from day to the last syllable of recorded time, and all our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to study death, I said. But there's another reading, to dusty death, S and D. S, D, and T get mixed up a great deal in transcription. Nobody knows what he actually wrote, because the pun of lighted fools the way to dusty death. Death is full of dust. Or to study death. Doesn't make any difference. If you can study death, it's no good. They've lighted fools the way to study death. Out, brief candle. And I imagine the candle actually on the table as Shakespeare is writing gives him the idea. And the idea for life's but a shadow. The candle throws a shadow. But a shadow is also a word for an actor. Oh, he's just a shadow. Rather beautiful word for an actor. Life's but a shadow, a poor player. So the logic of candlelight to candle shadow, shadow to actor to a poor player is a wonderful sequence of metaphorical thought. A poor player who struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. That's the end of him. Life's a stage. It is a tale, and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot. The nonsense, the babble of history, the nonsense of history, told by an idiot, signifying nothing. So, a devastating account of the meaninglessness of life. Look how good I'm being with scratching my itching my scratches with my sleeve. I hope you're doing the same to yourself and perhaps even to each other. So, my dear ones, enjoy reading The Bard, The Swan of Avon, William Shakespeare. I wish you joy of it. It's a joy to me and to all those who love the extraordinary sound music written by our great national poet. Ours, I'm afraid, I have to say, claim him for England. You have a great one too. Walt Whitman is one of the greatest that ever lived, and he is your national poet, and by God, he's a wonderful one. So we'll do Walt Whitman another time, I hope, and I hope to see you there, and I hope this finds you well, and that you watch this at some point casually, or a piece of it until you're fed up. And I hope it might be, if not useful, God help, we don't want, God help us from, keep us from usefulness. We want to be beautiful, not useful. But I hope it leads you to beauty, and I hope you're looking after yourselves and are not going out to party, and have got yourself in there safe with lots of food, and are keeping yourself safe so that I can see you at the end of this horror, which we shall survive. Take care and be well.